Hello YouTube, this is Muramasa here from Muramasa Gaming, and we're going to be going over a Vanguard tutorial. So in this, I am going to open the deck here and explain like the differences between certain cards, and then we're going to like stimulate an actual game up to the point that I explain like all of the main mechanics that you're going to run into mostly. You will see on the screen here like there's symbols here that you won't see on an actual map. That's just the program that I'm currently using. Down here we do have our ride deck, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So for right now, we're going to open up our main deck here. So we're going to start off with the one of over trigger. You are only allowed to have one of these, and when it's pulled, regardless of whose turn it is, it will be removed from the game, and the person who pulled it will draw a card. On top of that, it also has an additional effect. If you're just getting the like a trial deck or something, you will notice that the effect here is different. And if I can move over here without doing anything, you'll see that right here it has the additional effect. The additional effect only applies if you are the turn player that pulls this during your Vanguard's attack. So for this one in particular, it will double the power, which you'll notice as a sword, and the critical, which you'll notice as a star symbol. The critical is also located right here at the bottom center of the card. And the power of the unit is going to be right here, right beside the critical. And you will always know if this is a trigger unit or not based on the box in the upper right corner of the card, as well as the golden banner right here beside the card name. There's only going to be 3 different things that will appear here. It'll either be trigger unit, normal unit, or a order card. I do have an order card right here in the thing here. I know it's not the greatest, but it is also be right here. This is a set order, which means it's going to remain on the field. I don't think I have any of the other orders. No, not in this build. But going back to this here, uh, the one you'll get from the trial decks for the overtrigger here, it will basically give 2 of your units 100 million power if you pull it. And if you are the defending player, you'll just get the 100 million and you remove it from the game, draw a card. Something that I have noticed that a lot of newer players that I play with always questions the aspect in terms of when you're at 5 damage and you pull this, do you still lose the game? The answer to that is no. You do not lose the game. This is technically a 5th heal trigger in a sense, as since you can't place it in the damage and you draw a card, you don't lose the game, and you don't perform a secondary damage check because you've already fulfilled that requirement of the opponent attacking you. So just keep that in mind. I will go over actual heal triggers here in just a moment. Next, we have our critical trigger here. These are basically generic. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention on the over trigger. The shield value on the side of the card here is the highest in the entire game at 50,000. So if this is in your opening hand, don't worry too much about it, because I'll explain like start of the match protocols on this, so don't worry too much about seeing this in your opening hand. And then now we're going to go over here to the criticals. All the triggers themselves are pretty much straightforward. I don't think I have the... Yeah, I don't have one of the triggers here, but I'll still explain it. So the critical triggers here, we basically increase the damage that one of your units can do by 1. When you pull them for the drive check, they will all give power, of course. Everything outside of the over trigger will give 10,000 power. And all triggers except for draw triggers will have 15,000 shield unless otherwise stated on the card of as to why they won't. Some might have an effect down here that'll also replicate on the side of the card that it won't have as much shield. But yeah, the critical trigger increases your damage by 1, and you can split the effect of any trigger into 2 parts. You can give a unit on the Vanguard circle the critical, and you can give one of your rear guards over here the power boost. So next, we're going to talk about draw triggers again. This one, you get 10,000 power, and you get to draw a card, no matter whose turn it is, of course. And this has the lowest shield value of all of the triggers. So just keep that in mind. This is like a special case draw trigger where it does have an effect on the Guardian Circle, which you'll notice that it has like a triangle with a G, which we also see right here in the middle of the map. That if this is placed on, or if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, it can get an additional 5,000 shield. 9 times out of 10, all of your triggers are going to be vanilla or non-effect triggers. So just do keep that in mind. Lastly, we have our heal trigger. We're not going to worry with the ability down here. We're just going to worry mostly just by the box in the upper corner. As we were mentioning before, heal triggers also give 10,000 power. They have 10,000 shield, unfortunately. But this one is only 10,000 shield because of the ability down here that it can more or less gain an additional 15,000, but we're not going to worry with that. All triggers do have 15k shield outside of the draw trigger here at 5,000. Heal triggers are still 15, so don't let this one fool you. This is one of the special cases as to why it won't have 15. The trick to healing the damage or recovering damage in this game is when this is pulled as a drive or damage check. I'll go over the difference of that in just a moment. Is that you and your opponent either have to have the same number of damage or you have to be higher than your opponent in damage. So, for example, if you're both at 3 damage, you heal. If you're at 3 damage and your opponent's at 4, you do not heal. But if the roles were reversed and say you have 5 damage and then you pull this as your 6th, you will heal regardless because you're at 5 damage. Your opponent can never be at more damage than you at that point. So do keep that in mind. Alright, so the last special card in this deck that I do want to go over is this one. You'll notice that its shield border here is gold, and the number is exactly 0. That this is basically your perfect guard or a nullify, however you and your fan group decide you want to consider it. But overall, this is a Sentinel ability. Sentinels, you can only have 4 of these in a deck. Same as a heal trigger, you can only have 4 heal triggers in a deck. But as you can see right here, I'm running multiple, more than 4 cards with the critical ability. I'm running 7. This would be 8 if I didn't have the over trigger. Or I could take 1 out of the draw I can take one draw trigger out and add the fourth crit and go 8 crit, and then I can either keep 3 of the draws and so on. But triggers, you can only have 16 in a deck. There's no limit to how many orders you can run or any number of the previous cards, but we'll get into that in just a moment. The trick to the nullifies or perfect guards here, which I'm going to refer to them as nullifies for this video, is that when this is placed into your guardian circle, which I'll just set that here. So right here in the guardian circle, right in the big middle green circle of the screen, you'll discard one card to your drop zone here. That's directly under your deck. And you will stop all incoming damage for this attack only. So if it's your opponent's Vanguard swinging at you and you don't want to take the damage, you can drop this, and you won't take any damage, of course, but they can still pull their triggers and stuff and still hit you. So do keep that in mind. Toss that back in the deck. So other than that, your deck's only going to normally consist of grade 0s through grade 3s at the beginning when you first start out, and then as you progress you might find something like a grade 4 that you want to ride into later on and add to your deck, but we're not going to cover the grade 4 as much because you notice the ride deck only allows you to go up to grade 3, so I'm going to teach you just the bare minimum of this. But the grade 4s, once you ride it, you cannot ride down. Just do keep that in mind. The grade 4s are just that powerful. One more thing about the triggers and the grade 1 units is that you'll see this little arrow pointing up. This allows you to boost, and when you boost it, so let me grab, let me set myself here in the battle phase real quick. So we'll just grab this card here and a grade 3. So if I was to boost it by turning it sideways, you'll see the power of this card went up from 13 to 21. So the back row for grade 0s and 1s only. Some grade 2s, but we're not going to go into that. But you'll notice if a grade 2 can do this due to the card text. So you can swing 21 at any of your opponent's front row units here. Put these back in the deck. Alright, so now we're going to shuffle the deck up here. And now we're going to explain everything. So to start off with, we draw 5 cards. As you see, we got 2 triggers and the grade 4 here, but like I said, we're not going to worry with the grade 4. I'm going to keep it for this demonstration. But for here, you do have 1 free mulligan. So what you do is you place them at the bottom of the deck. Any number of cards that you wish to keep or put back. And then you'll draw from the top of the deck 2 additional cards. We drew the heal trigger, which is unfortunate here. Then after you draw back up to the mulligan, you'll reshuffle your deck. Then at this point, you will already have your Vanguard here face down, like your starting Vanguard. But for this instance, I can't do it in this update of this program. Used to, I could have it face down, like unless I delete it or something. Delete is a older mechanic, so don't worry too much about that. But for the start of the game, you would have your Vanguard right here face down, both you and your opponent. And then after the mulligan and the dice roll, of course, depending on who wins, let's see here. We'll flip here, and of course it says Bacchus, so it's calling us an idiot. So let's say you called heads and the coin was heads. You can choose to go first or second. We don't have an opponent here, so we are going to go first. So then we will stand up our Vanguard as the game implies, which would be just flipping it back face up. And then we will start with the normal thing here. So for start our turn, we draw. We drew a nullify, which is always nice. So we are still in our ride phase here. So I'm waiting back up to ride. Now we have access to our ride deck. Since we are only at grade 0, we can only go up to the grade 1 currently. These, so now our grade 0 or our starting Vanguard, they have abilities for when you go second, that when you place a grade 1 on top of them, you can draw an additional card. Back in the V era, which this is the overdress era here, so do keep that in mind. V era, it was we could always draw a card, and now it's only if you go second you can draw that card. So we want to ride into this one right here, Kyanite Blue, but we don't have it in our main hand. So that's never going to be an issue here. So we're going to take one card from our hand. We're going to discard it to our drop zone. And then we're going to ride it directly. I don't know what an energy crest is. What is this? What is this? I have no clue what this is. This is something new, so I'm not going to cover it as I don't even know what it is. So we rode from our ride deck here. Now, Kyanite Blue does have an effect that when it's placed on Vanguard, you'll notice it because it has the Vanguard circle here and the V, or the red circle with a V on it, which will be right here on the card, which will also be more simplified to look at right here. That says I can search my deck for one prison card, reveal it, add it to my hand, and then we shuffle our deck. So we open up our deck. We search for one prison card to be right here. So we add it to our hand. And now the cost of activating the so the cost of activating this is we place it here in our order zone. And the cost of activating this is we rest one unit. And then we soul charge 3 cards. Soul charge means that we take one card from the top of our deck and place it under our Vanguard into the soul here. Cards in the soul or anything under the Vanguard is considered a soul, so we got the soul charge 3. So 1, 2, and 3. Cards in here are public knowledge, so do keep that in mind that you and your opponent can look at this at any point. Like, I can click the opponent's soul here and look. But as you're playing face to face, you can just ask to be like, hey, can I see the soul of your Vanguard? And you can check to see what it is. Some decks you do want to keep in mind about that, so do keep that in mind. But now this prison here is really nice because not only that do we have the option of stealing our opponent's rear guards and some cards from their hand depending on the effect that we use. They can also grab their cards back, unfortunately. And by doing so, they can Soul Blast one or Counter Blast one, depending. Soul Blast is you take one card from under your soul or under your Vanguard and you discard it to the drop zone. And they can grab any one singular card from the prison, and they can call it to any of their rear guards. If they counterblast or flip one damage face down, they can grab any 2 cards from the prison and call them. You will notice the difference here because Soul Blast, it'd be just a circle with a big S in it, and then it'll say Blast, and then it'll have a number right beside it, telling you how many cards that you have to get rid of from the Soul. Same with the Counter Blast, it'll be a big C in a circle, and then Blast right beside it and a number. And by doing that, we can basically pay for our abilities here. So, as this would be your general first turn, this is where we would end our turn. And then we would go back to our turn, give or take. But we're going to assume that the opponent here, okay, it won't let me do that. So, let's just assume that our opponent attacked us, and we have the ability to guard. So, they're grade 1, 8,000. So let's say they attacked us and they pulled no triggers. And this is after we decided that we were not going to guard. But for instance here, if we were to guard, we could place it right here in the guard circle, which we're not going to do. But just for this instance here, if we were to guard, then it will take the shield value on the side of the card and add it to our Vanguard's 8,000. So it'd be like pulling the trigger in this point because it's not that extra 5, which we're going to consider this a 15. So we'd go 15 to the 8,000, which would be 23,000 to their 8,000. So they would not hit regardless, but we're not actually guarding here. We're actually going to take the damage. If I could click the battle phase over here for them, this would automatically went over here to the damage. But it didn't. But I can't do that in a single play. Now we go into our second turn, and when we draw. So right here, I would discard another card, and now we go into the grade 2. So right here in this one right here, this allows us to steal 1 card from our opponent, like from their hand. So, I don't know how to grab that, so let's just grab 1 card from our drop zone here just to implement that we stole 1 card from our opponent. Because it could just be a mirror match or something. So we now have 1 card in our prison. And now with that, we can also call more cards if we so chose. But for this instance, we're not going to. So we can go battle phase and attack. Then we would do a drive check. So now the opponent would have to choose if they wanted to guard. Because it's 10,000 power to their 8,000, so they would have to guard it, but which would put us down to needing at least 1 trigger or so to hit them. So let's say they don't guard. We didn't get a trigger either. So they would take 1 damage, so now they're at 1. So let's just mark it right here. Just so we can keep up with what the opponents currently have. So then, as we would go through, we would end our turn, which would reset all of our trigger abilities. Now, they go into grade 2. Now, let's say they call 2 grade 2s into the front row here. And that's all they do. So they attack with this one over here. So we take that. We don't get a trigger. They swing with this one over here for the same amount. Let's say we don't want to take too much damage, so we let that one go through. We don't get another trigger again, which is unfortunate. And now they attack with their Vanguard at 10,000. So we place this into the guard circle here. Now we're only going to count this as 15,000 shield because like I said earlier in the video, we're not going to focus on the special ability of the triggers. So this will be 15,000 shield on this. So now we're at 25. So since we said that they didn't call anything to the back row, so they're only swinging for 10, they would have to pull a trigger here. And let's say they did pull a trigger. Let's say they pulled a draw trigger. So now they have an additional card in their hand. And their Vanguard's only at 20 to our 25. But if we didn't apply this as a normal trigger, that 10,000 would still force us to take the damage, as it would be equal to our Vanguard's power. The attack will always succeed if the power is equal or greater than all the defense. So we did guard that successfully, as we're going to count this as a normal 15,000 heal trigger. And now we start our turn again. So with that, we are going to discard here. And now we're going to go into our grade 3. Now we can start activating certain abilities here. Like, if we were to call Accuse here, we can Soul Blast 1 and we can imprison the top card of the opponent's deck. And then if there would be 2 or more cards imprisoned, she would get 5,000 additional power. So let's do that here. We place her. We declare that we are going to be using the ability of when she's placed. So we Soul Blast 1. We can Soul Blast any card in the soul that we wish. So we're just going to Soul Blast the starter here for this instance. And because we're never going to get it back, we're going to say that that's the top card of their deck. Just these cards here can be any card in existence. I'm just doing it for instances here. So now since she does get an extra 5,000 power, we're going to add that here, because we do have 2 or more cards imprisoned. On top of that, our Vanguard here also has an ability that when there's at least 1 card imprisoned, she gets 10,000 power. As you'll see right here where it has continuous Vanguard during your turn, if 1 or more cards in your opponent's is imprisoned into your prison zone, this unit gets 10,000 power. Then if there are 3 or more cards in prison, this unit also gets 1 additional drive check, so which means that we would no longer be checking 1 card, we'd be checking 3. Because this card here has the twin drive, which looks like a double helix. Also, the grade 2s have this little arrow pointing downward in a way. This is your intercept ability, which allows you to place it. I'll just use this as a grade 1 example here, but if it was a grade 2 and have this symbol here, we can place it into the guard circle directly from the front row. Front row only. And they do have an ability for some cards in the back row to be able to do that, but 99% of the time it'll only be grade 2s from the front row. So now we're going to use the ability of suppress right here. So by calling it, and we have a Vanguard with Seraph in our name, so she automatically gets 5,000 power. And when this is placed on rear guard from hand, if 3 or more cards is imprisoned, we would be able to search our deck, but we only have 2 here. Now, if we would have waited to call that and used our Vanguard's ability here. So let's say we use our Vanguard's ability here and we counterblast 1. So we'll just flip 1 damage that we have face down to pay for this ability. We can now take the 2 front row rear guards that our opponent called on the previous turn. Set them right there. Now we have 4 cards imprisoned. And since we have 4 cards imprisoned, our Vanguard gets that additional drive check. Now we can call Suppress Gleamer. Of course, she gets the... Whoops. Now she gets that extra... Whoops. That extra 5,000 power. And now we can search for another card with the same card name as her and call it to a rear guard as well. So we're going to do that now. So let's call her right here. Of course, she does get that 5,000 power. Now, here we have choices. We can attack with the rear guard first, or we can attack with the Vanguard first. If we attack with the Vanguard first, we have a chance of powering up the rear guard here. But if we attack with the rear guard, then the only thing that we can really do is power up our Vanguard. So let's attack with the Vanguard here first, which will be 36,000. If they chose not to guard here, we would do 3 drive checks. The opponent's at 1, so they're at no danger of losing. Worst case scenario for them, outside of us pulling the over trigger that we have in this deck, is they would go to 4 damage. So we would perform 3 drive checks off of this card. Normally, all grade 3s would only do 2 drive checks because of the twin drive ability that looks like the double helix. I will go over the grade 4 here. It's a double helix with an extra line in the middle. And this is called triple drive. And so it does exactly what the grade 3 does through her ability of having 3 or more imprisoned, except they get that permanently without any type of abilities. They just automatically do 3 drive checks every turn, where Seraph Snow here is conditional of the 3rd drive check. So we're going to say that the opponent decides they're not going to guard because they're only at 1 damage. So we do the first check. We don't get a trigger here. Do our second check. Again, no trigger, which is very unfortunate. And then our last check, we get a critical trigger. So since the opponent here chose not to guard, we're going to give our power over here to accuse. But the critical effect here is going to remain on Seraph Snow, which will increase her damage output by 1. Now, the opponent will now take 2 damage. So, let's say they pulled no triggers on both of theirs. So now, opponent will be at 3. So then they would also now have to deal with this. So now let's say they chose not to guard that as well. And now let's say they pull a trigger here. They pull a heal trigger, so the opponent would, while this is still in your trigger zone, which would be right above your deck, I can't do it here, but while it's still in your trigger zone, they would remove 1 damage from their damage zone, and then they would place it into their drop zone. Of course, they would give 10,000 power to their Vanguard. Then they would place the heal trigger into the damage. So they would remain at 3 for this instance. And the game would continue like this back and forth until either you or your opponent would reach 6 damage, or until one of you decks out. Unlike other games like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic, and stuff, the exact moment that you reach 0 cards in your deck, you will lose. It does not matter whose turn it is. The exact moment that you have no cards in your deck, you will automatically lose the duel, or in this case, you will lose the fight. And that's very unfortunate. There are alternate win conditions in this game outside of just dealing 6 damage, but we're not going to go over that, as a lot of those are obsolete and no longer viable in the standard format of the game. But do keep that in mind, that there could be possible other win conditions that they bring to the game in the future. I will reference one of them, and it was a older Link Joker monster that basically had, if you had all 5 of your opponent's cards locked, you would win the duel. On your if they didn't unlock during your opponent's next end phase, which there was plenty of ways that you could prevent them from unlocking. Lock is still a part of the game here, which is part of Brantgate, or the original name for them would be Link Joker. Lock is basically just flipping one of your opponent's cards or one of your cards face down, and they are unusable for the rest of the turn unless you have an ability that could unlock them. We're not going to really go into too much detail about that, because that would require me to go into even more detail of the base game, and 9 times out of 10 you're not going to deal with that unless you're playing with somebody who's played the previous formats and they're showing you older decks. But this is Muramasa signing out. I hope this was very informative. If I did happen to miss something, just let me know down in the comments, and I will try and update this video later on if I did miss something. But yeah, this is Muramasa signing out.